Number 10. Lego Sonic. This one's quite unique looking with the Lego body just like the other characters in the Lego games. But this guy's pretty different in terms of personality as well. He's still the same happy-go-lucky speedster, but he also seems to be quite self-aware and actually makes jokes about the real world, as is pretty common in the Lego games. He makes various references to internet memes and various pop culture things like The Simpsons. Is he as funny as Lego Batman? I don't think so, but he's pretty great. Number 9. Archie Sonic. This is the Sonic that we see in the comics by Archie Comics. These comics are quite popular and were around for a whopping 24 years before being cancelled this year. The comics followed two main continuities. From issue 1 to 247, it took place on Mobius, which turned out to actually be a future Earth around the year 14,000. After Mobius was hit with a Genesis wave, Mobius and the alternate realities were all totally changed up, with Mobius looking more like the world found in the Sonic games. Sonic himself is pretty similar in these storylines, and his personality is pretty much the same as in the games, but it's pretty great seeing him in Archie comic style. Plus, the other entries on this list come from these comics, so it's pretty important that you have a grasp on them. Number 8. Stealth the Hedgehog. Stealth comes from Mobius 17, and it's actually based on Spider-Man, which is pretty neat. At first glance, it's hard to tell that he's specifically Spidey, but when you consider that Eggman is Professor Egg and based on Green Goblin, it's much clearer that Sonic is based on Spidey. This version wears a mask and battles against the villainous Professor Egg. Fun fact, there was actually another version of Sonic that straight up wore a Spider-Man costume. Nice. Number 7. Sonark. Sonark was an alternate version of Sonic from the Sentai Zone. I repeat, the Sentai Zone, with an S. Do not mishear me and look up something else or you're in for a shock. He was a member of the Sonic-a-Man Chaos Ninja Team who was summoned by Zonic when Salaktor was attacking. Sonark was actually based on Ken the Eagle, a member of a superhero team in the anime Gatchaman, as you can kinda tell from the team name Sonic-a-Man. I love parody versions of other characters and Sonic is certainly not without those. Speaking of which, number 6. Sonic Zilla. As with other members on this list, this Sonic was a parody of another popular character. Can you guess who it is? Yes, it's Godzilla. This Sonic, as well as the other members of the Freedom Fighters from his dimension, was changed into a giant monster by Chaos Emerald radiation and threatened the city. After his father, Jules Zilla, was accidentally killed by the real Sonic using the giant Robotno machinery, Sonic Zilla broke down, mourning the death of his father. It's a pretty sad story, but they were giant mutated things that were destroying the city. We're kind of asking for it. Number 5. Cyborg Sonic. In this Sonic's dimension, Robo Robotnik turned the Freedom Fighters into cyborgs in hopes of defeating them, but they used their cybernetic enhancements to fight back. But then Robotnik turned himself into a robot and took out the majority of the fighters, with Cyborg Sonic being the only known survivor. He eventually went to Mobius Prime to get help and managed to defeat Robo Robotnik, getting by with a little help from his friends, and alternate versions of himself. Something tells me that isn't quite what the Beatles had in mind when they wrote those lyrics. Number 4. Sonic. With a K. This Sonic had a similar origin to our usual Sonic, but this time he was tricked by Robotnik into being fired into space on a rocket. As luck would have it, he ran into some aliens called the Pearl Men who gave him a spacesuit that could let him survive out in space. Then they sent him drifting into space in suspended animation. 1,000 years later, he returned to Mobius and formed the Freedom Fighters of the Galaxy, with various descendants of the Knothole Freedom Fighters. They went on to kick some butt and even take on the planet-devouring Robolactus, who's essentially a combination of Robotnik and Galactus. So this is basically Star-Lord Sonic. Cool. Number 3. Anti-Sonic. This is what Scourge was known as before he changed. He's kind of like Prime Sonic if Prime Sonic was a character in Grease, or if he got the Venom symbiote on him and decided to prance around like Tobey Maguire in Spider-Man 3. He killed his father to become the ruler of Mobitropolis with the help of Auntie Sally. He eventually went to Prime Mobius and tried to woo all the sexy females, pretending to be Sonic himself. When he was confronted by Rouge, who saw through him, he absorbed the radiation of the Master Emerald, becoming the Green Scourge. If you watch Top 10 Nerd, you'll know that I love me some evil versions of characters, so this was particularly enjoyable for me. Number 2. Sonic the Bog Hog. Sonic the Bog Hog is the prehistoric version of Sonic from prehistoric Mobius, called the Bog Hog because there weren't any hedges back then apparently. He's the leader of the prehistoric Freedom Fighters, living in fear of attacks from their enemy Ivana Robotina and the dangerous Mobisaurs. Sonic arrived in this time to find the fighters planning to live underground to hide, which made him worry that he'd change into Sonic the Mole if this past became reality. So he helped them to plant hedges, creating the Great Forest. It's kind of a silly story, but hey, Sonic is often silly, and it's pretty great seeing him with that sick beard. Number 1. Zonic. Zonic comes from the no zone, which is 90 degrees from everywhere. Due to the perpendicularity of his zone to other zones, yes, that's a word, he often shows up sideways in other realities. He works as a zone cop. A lot of the time when dimension hopping's happening, Zonic isn't far behind. He's even often the cause of the hopping. He frequently recruits our Sonic to help out in other dimensions because our Sonic is a freaking boss, but he isn't only concerned with Sonic. For example, when Mammoth Mogul was trying to destroy every zone, he called upon the alternate versions of Tails to help him, who merged into Titan Tails to stop Mogul. So yeah, Zonic's kind of a boss. Number 10. Prelate Shadow. Prelate Shadow comes from Dark Mobius, a world where Knuckles turned into the evil Enerjack and took over the world. Enerjack took out the cores of the Mobians to create his Prelates, an army of robots that fight for Enerjack as slaves. Thankfully, Silver was able to make his way to that universe and save the day with the help of the remaining freedom fighters, and Janik Ka took all his powers and changed everything back. But the Prelates were still awesome. Number 9. Sonic Boom Shadow. The shadow of Sonic Boom, like other Boom characters, is taller and lankier than usual. But his physical differences aren't the most important bit. In Boom, Shadow isn't the anti-hero-ish character we're used to, but rather an evil-ish character. He's Sonic's arch rival, and he's much more aggressive and hostile towards the gang. I'm not sure how I feel about this. I love bad guys, but I really like him better as a badass who does whatever it takes to get the job done. Number 8. Mecha Shadow. Mecha Shadow has been in a few different games, including Sonic and Kirby's Super Mega Ultra Superstars and Ultra Sonic the Hedgehog. As with most mecha characters, Mecha Shadow is a villain, and we all know villains rock. Unsurprisingly, he looks quite different from the usual Shadow since he's made of metal. Duh. Number 7. Hedgehog the Hedgehog. Hedgehog the Hedgehog is a companion drawing to Sanic Hedgehog, who is an alternate version of Sonic in Part 2. As I'm sure you'd expect, Hedgehog the Hedgehog is a crude drawing of Shadow done on paint. And even though it's essentially the same as the Sonic one with different colors, I just find it so funny. I don't know why. Probably because I'm actually 8 years old behind all this facial hair and eyebrows. Number 6. Sir Lancelot. This is a version of Shadow from the Archie comics, and he's just awesome. If you're a fan of Top 10 Nerd, you may know that I love when characters are reimagined in medieval times, and Lancelot is no exception. In his universe, based on Sonic and the Black Knight, Shadow is one of King Arthur's knights. After Merlina summons Sonic to defend her, Lancelot, Gawain, who's Knuckles, and Percival, who was Blaze, were ordered to go after them. Sadly, we didn't get to see him in action in the comics, but he was pretty insane in Sonic and the Black Knight, and probably looked even cooler there. Number 5. Super Shadow. I know, it's a transformation, but there straight up aren't that many actual versions of the guy, and this was a pretty cool moment in the comics anyway. After Shadow sacrificed himself to save the world, he was revived by a bunch of alien scientists called the BEM. They healed him up and imbued him with enough energy to turn into the super form, and it's pretty awesome. And also, the BEM is a hilarious name for a race. Number 4. Shadow Androids. The Shadow Androids were seen in Sonic Heroes, having been created by Dr. Eggman. They were built to act as his army, although he eventually stopped producing them. They look fairly similar to Shadow, although they have darker skin and no mouth. They have a bunch of the same abilities as Shadow, with their own versions of his Chaos Spears and homing attack. An interesting thing to note about them is that it was mentioned that they were created using cloning, so they may not be purely mechanical androids. Maybe there's a bit of humanity in there. Or hedgehoggity. Number 3. Light Shadow. This one sounds like a bit of a contradiction, but it's actually a super cool version of the guy. In this universe, King Sonic left the throne unoccupied, and Shadow went, oh sweet, and took over. He took over Mobius within a year and maintained a terrified peace for 20 years, until he was put in suspended animation by Lara Sue. This is one of my favorite versions of him. It highlights his strengths and flaws and shows that peace can be achieved through violence, but it isn't real peace. Number 2. Sonic for Hire Shadow. If you've seen the other alternate Sonic lists, you'll be familiar with Sonic for Hire. It's a YouTube show starring 8-bit versions of the characters getting up to weird and adult hijinks. Shadow is introduced having just committed a crime. How did they figure that out? He was carrying a bag with stolen on it, and cops saying that he had done a bunch of illegal. Then the cops shot him in the spine while Sonic played Xbox. Sounds about right. Number 1. Urban Sonic. Okay, before you start yelling at me, I didn't make the joke, I just find it hilarious. This Shadow comes from the Sonic and Shadow funny animations by Smash Bits Animations, and this is how he's introduced.
It's 2:30, and I'm here to foil Eggman's. And hello, Urban me?
Whoa, what is this?
He's constantly playing with guns, and he isn't the safest with them, and he's a total moron, and it's absolutely hilarious. I had never seen these before researching this video, but you should go watch them right now. Well, not right now, after this video. and after you like and subscribe. Then go watch the funny animation, then come back and watch more of ours.
And at number 10 is Zilla. Starting off our list with one of the versions of Knuckles that deviates a lot from the original, meet Zilla. Like Godzilla but Knuckles. And actually not a dinosaur, more like a kraken, actually. Anyway, Zilla is from an alternate version of Mobius, where Chaos Emerald radiation mutates and disfigures him. He becomes Zilla and starts to terrorize civilians. Luckily, he's defeated by Sonic, when Sonic pilots the giant Robotno and fights him. But kinda neat to see him as a giant tentacle monster. Up next, number 9 is Nuxin. Here we have a parody of a character from Gatchaman called Nuxin. So Science Ninja Team Gatchaman is a Japanese superhero team from an anime created in 1972. And if I'm mispronouncing the name wrong, I am eternally sorry. Nuxin is a parody of Joe, and the alternate reality that Nuxin is from is a parody of Gatchaman itself, called the Sentai Zone. The team in this alternate reality is called Sonica Chaos Ninja Team, who fights against Salictor, aka the alternate of Sally Acorn. Up next, number 8 is Sinbad. From the Arabian Nights Zone, this alternate is a brave pirate adventurer who helps Sonic fight Erasur Djinn, who is a sinister genie trying to take over and rule the Arabian Nights Zone. Based on the character of the same name from the novel 1001 Arabian Nights, Sinbad appears in the Nintendo Wii game Sonic and the Secret Rings. Up next, number 7 is Lieutenant Knuckles. Knuckles is known for being hot-headed but also honorable, and he's always fighting to do the right thing, even when he's manipulated into doing what he thinks is right. This alternate version of him, Lieutenant Knuckles, takes this to a whole other level by being the leader of a group called the Echidna Enforcers. From the Litigopolis Zone, a city dedicated to law and order, the Echidna Enforcers are the equivalent to the Dark Legion, and also share many equality to the Echidna security team. Anyway, Lieutenant Knuckles mistook Sonic for Anti-Sonic and tried to arrest him, but failed to do so when he was knocked out by Sally McAcorn. And at number 6 is Knuckles, with a Z, and this guy is Knuckles' No Zone counterpart. And here's the fun weird part about it. No one has ever seen what Knuckles looks like. He's the one no-zone inhabitant that's been mentioned in official Sonic media in text, but has no image. Or rather, no images have been produced of the character, despite being one of the Zone Cops. If you're unfamiliar with who the Zone Cops are, they're essentially the police that patrol all of the zones in the multiverse. While we may not have an actual image to run with for Knuckles, take a look at Sonic's counterpart, Zonic, which is much easier to pronounce than Znuckles. Knuckles, Snuggles, Snuggles. Up next, number 5 is Sonic Boom Zone Knuckles. Not to be confused with the Sonic Boom of record store fame in Toronto. The Sonic Boom Zone Knuckles is an alternate reality where he, Sonic, and co. all reside on the tropical island of Bygone Island, because it's an island. This Knuckles is, well, he isn't necessarily the sharpest tool in the shed, or the sharpest knuckle spike in the multiverse, perhaps. No? Pun doesn't really work? Yeah, that's fine, it was a long shot. Anyway, this Knuckles is known for his lack of intelligence, and general slowness. Of the mind, that is. That being said, he's incredibly loyal to his friends and teammates. Physically, this Knuckles has got some subtle but important differences. He's taller and more muscular than the regular Knuckles, with many noting the similarities to Thrash the Devil. He also has hand wraps on, and wraps on his lower legs too. And at number 4 is Tuxedo Nu. Take one guess who this is a parody of.
I am Tuxedo Mask.
If you thought of Tuxedo Mask from Sailor Moon, you're spot on. Not that it was that difficult to assume though, because let's be honest, he's like wearing the exact same thing, and the name isn't that far off. Tuxedo Nu is from the Luna Zone, and he pursues Ivana Robotina when she escapes their zone and attacks Mobius Prime. Nux, Sally Moon, and Shibi Rose chase after Robotina, who Nux manages to subdue with one of his roses, returning to the Luna Zone afterwards. Of course, after making Sonic uncomfortable, that is. Many feel that having Knuckles assume the role of Tuxedo Nu was for a comedic effect, considering Sonic's feelings towards Sally, and the fact that he and Knuckles are, you know, rivals. Knuckles taking his girl. And at number 3 is Onux. Dresses like a Scot, but talks with an Irish accent. Also known as Anti-Knuckles, the overseer of Demon Island, Onux went head to head with the OG Knuckles, and the two couldn't be any different. Onux is a total pacifist. He doesn't like to use violence, and only uses it as a last resort. So back to that fighting Knuckles situation. He was tricked by evil Sonic into aiding in the theft of the Chaos Emeralds from Mobius Prime's floating island. This eventually left him in a situation where he had to battle Knuckles, first on Mobius Prime and then on Anti-Mobius, which resulted in him forfeiting the fight because he didn't think violence was the answer. Knuckles was like, dude, that's messed up. Saving your home should be worth fighting for, hello. But despite that, Knuckles ends up helping Onux, trying to find out why his home on Sunken Island is losing all of its oxygen. Now flash forward a little bit. Eventually Onux would be defeated by Scourge during his takeover of Mobius, where he was spared because Scourge wanted him to grovel beneath him. Fun. Up next at number 2 is Light Mobius, aka Cowboy Knuckles. from an alternate future timeline. So this version of Knuckles defeated Dr. Eggman when he turned into his Chaos Knuckles form, and in the aftermath decided he would try to recreate Mobius the way that he thought it should be structured. This is where Sonic gets involved, busts out an alien device that rids Knuckles of all of his newfound powers, and results in him losing an eye. So as you can imagine, this starts an age-old rivalry that only detours when he and Sonic must team up to save Mobius. Twice. Still hot-headed and aggressive, he's a bit wiser than the Knuckles we've grown to love, and with age has learned how to control his temper better. Plus he's also a dad. And finally, in our number 1 spot is Dark Mobius. The flip side of that one. Dark Mobius is also from a possible future in an alternate timeline, and he was a guardian who had become corrupted with chaos power, turning him into an incarnation of Enerjack, who is also known as Dark Enerjack. He conquered the planet, extracts cores from his victims, and then eventually got bored of ruling the world, so naturally he upped his game and started trying to control other alternate realities, as one does when you're trying to up your villain cred. Anyway, it doesn't go as planned for Enerjack when he crosses paths with Silver the Hedgehog, a time traveler, and the two duke it out. I mean, despite all that villainy, he does look really cool though.
Number 10. Ivana Robotina. We didn't see this version a ton, but it's so rare to find a female version of Eggman that I felt I should include it, because it's not pretty. She comes from the Luna Zone, acting as the enemy of Sally Moon. Sound familiar? Yeah, this is a zone based on Sailor Moon characters, with Ivana seemingly acting as a counterpart to Queen Beryl. This is actually one of the coolest versions of Robotnik though, because instead of roboticizing her enemies like Robotnik, she changes people into monsters. And monsters are just way cooler than robots. Sorry, not sorry. Number 9. Robo Robotnik. Mechanical versions of Sonic can make him look pretty badass, but the robot version of Eggman is, it's not exactly fear-inspiring. It's like TikTok from Return to Oz meets Darth Vader. Now check out that reference, but you don't see many Return to Oz references, huh? I'm watching it tonight. Anyway, where was I? Oh right, Robo Robotnik comes from an alternate universe where he turned the freedom fighters into cyborgs. Then they turned on him, and he turned himself into a cyborg. Then he beat them and forced Cyborg Sonic to go get help. So yeah, Robo Robotnik is pretty sick, even if he doesn't look so sick. Number 8. Warden Zoobotnik. Warden Zoobotnik comes from the No Zone, where he's in charge of the Zone jail. He isn't on the best of terms with Zonic, but apparently he does a decent job, most of the time. Zonic is one of the most popular versions of Sonic, and Zoobotnik is a pretty interesting version of Eggman. It's fun to see him actually in a different position, even if he's still kind of a jerk. Number 7. Eggman Boom. Eggman Boom is obviously the Robotnik from Sonic Boom. He actually looks a lot more normal, with his egg shape being essentially turned upside down, making him kind of look like the Iron Sheik with goggles. And, you know, without the keffiyeh on his head and wearing a shirt. Okay, he doesn't look that much like him, whatever. What's nice about this version, though, is that he's a lot more laid back and funny, similar to his personality in Sonicexe, at least until he builds another robot to kill them all. Number 6. Eggman with eyes. The 2006 Sonic the Hedgehog game was, well, it wasn't the best. It was pretty glitchy with long load times and a weird plot, which resulted in it being panned by reviewers. For me, though, the worst part is the realistic portrayal of Eggman. Most of the time it's okay, if a bit strange, but the thing is, they make it so that you can see his eyes behind the glasses from certain angles. Ugh, no, I don't want to see his eyes. That isn't right. Just stop it. Number 5. Slapnik! This is the version of Eggman from the YouTube series Bonic. Here he takes on such totally original characters as Bonic and Bluckles. Now, we didn't actually see Eggman in the videos since the heroes were too distracted arguing about whether or not they're actually Sonic and Knuckles or totally original characters, but the creator of the videos drew him on the stream once, and he looks like this. Number 4. Robolactus. Here's one for the comic book fans, fittingly coming from the Archie comics. If you couldn't tell from the name, Robolactus is an amalgamation of Dr. Robotnik and Galactus, the planet-devouring being from Marvel Comics. Yes, he's awesome. Yes, he's huge. And yes, he still has a silver henchman, but he isn't quite as badass as the Surfer, because he's silver Snively. Right when you thought Snively couldn't get any more unsettling. Number 3. Anti-Robotnik. Back to the Archie Sonic comics for this one, there are just so many great versions from those comics. Dr. Ivo Kintobor is the good version of Robotnik, and I just realized that his name is Robotnik backwards. He comes from the Antiverse, a world where the personalities of the main characters are largely swapped. The Freedom Fighters become the Anti-Freedom Fighters, or the Suppression Squad, while Eggman is actually a super nice guy who runs a hospital. Is he as cool as Evil Eggman? Probably not, but it's a nice change, although the skinny thing is totally jarring. Number 2. Satam Eggman. In the Saturday morning Sonic show, Eggman departed from his usual kinda angry, kinda silly, kinda funny thing and just went straight up bad guy. Although pretty much every kid's show from the 90s had that kind of bad guy, you know, Sonic, Inspector Gadget, Care Bears.
You need a villain with a scary, gravelly voice.
But this one was pretty great as far as the super evil Robotniks go. Plus, he was voiced by Jim Cummings, who was also the voice of pretty much everyone in every show ever. Jim Cummings is the man, but he has a funny name. Number 1. Sonic X Eggman. The Eggman from the Sonic X comics is widely viewed viewed as one of the best and most fleshed out versions, and I can't help but agree. This version goes out for the approval from the public and actually ends up reforming quite a bit. He's pretty friendly with both Sonic and his robots, and ends up becoming such a good dude that Sonic kinda has to push him back towards villainy just so he has someone to fight. Plus he was a Mexican wrestler, and a good one, which is amazing. Number 10. Amy X. Amy X is a version of Amy from the Archie comics Sonicexe. Hailing from the X Zone, she's pretty darn similar to our own Amy, smacking nerds with her hammer and swooning over her version of Sonic. In this world, however, she's quite a bit angrier and can be pretty reckless. Plus she hates Domino's pizza apparently, which is just wrong, because Domino's rocks. Hey Domino's, feel free to send me free pizza anytime, I'll be waiting. Number 9. Shibi Rose. Shibi Rose comes from the Luna Zone, otherwise known as that zone where everyone is based on Sailor Moon characters. In this reality, Amy takes on the role of Sailor Shibi Moon, helping out Sally Moon on their adventures. They fight against Ivana Robotina alongside, wait for it, Tuxedo Nux. God, I love that. If you want to see more about Tuxedo Nux, check out our top 10 versions of Knuckles video on the channel. He's awesome. Number 8. Amy Boom. As with a lot of other characters in Sonic Boom, Amy doesn't look or act too differently from other mediums. Sure, she's a bit taller and a bit skinnier and has a bit more tood, but she's still the same old Amy. But here she's intent on crushing those gender stereotypes.
Just as good an athlete as a male?
But she isn't as good a feminist as Knuckles.
You know, Amy, anytime someone calls attention to the breaking of gender roles, it ultimately undermines the concept of gender equality by implying that this is an exception and not the status quo.
Number 7. Sentai Amy. Sentai Amy comes from, you guessed it, the Sentai Zone. Here, many of our favorite Sonic characters are reimagined as members of Sonic-a-Man, Chaos Ninja Team. This is a reference to the Japanese superhero team Gatchaman. This is a pretty cool version of Amy who zips around in a bird-shaped battle suit. If you're curious, look it up, but as with Sentai Sonic, it's Sentai with an S. Number 6. CD Amy. This Amy from the Sonic CD is one of the most different versions of the gal out there, which isn't surprising since it was her first appearance. In this one, she looks a lot more like Sonic, but pink, because, you know, she's a girl, and girls are pink, and wear dresses. Always. This look lasted a while before she changed into the look she has now. In this game, Amy's basically Zelda to Sonic's Link, where she's kidnapped by Metal Sonic and Sonic has to save her. Then she kisses him. Aww. Number 5. Anti-Amy Rose. Anti-Amy Rose, or Rosie the Rascal, is Amy's evil counterpart from Mobius. But with Rosie, when she used the ring to make herself older, it also made her frickin' insane. Don't you hate it when that happens? She's actually a pretty funny character, constantly bugging Scourge for ignoring her. Plus, as I'm sure you know by now, I love evil versions of characters, so this one's definitely up there for me. Number 4. Amy the Fighter. This is a version of Amy seen in the Sonic the Fighters game from 1996, a fighting game that pitted various Sonic characters against each other. This version had a somewhat modern look while keeping with the classic, more Sonic-like appearance. This was pretty huge since it was the first time we saw Amy using her famous Pico Pico hammer, and the only time we saw her use hyper mode in the games. Now that's pretty darn nifty. Number 3. Amy Zilla. Yep, you may remember Sonic Zilla from the first alternate Sonic video, and Tails Zilla from the alternate Tails list, and guess what? There's an Amy Zilla too. After being hit with Chaos Emerald radiation, she was changed into a giant monster. You know, like Godzilla. Now, I'm not gonna lie, Amy Zilla doesn't really look as cool as Sonic Zilla or Tails Zilla. Maybe it's a tutu, but it's still pretty sick relative to the normal Amy. Number 2. Metal Amy. I'm sure we all knew this was coming. With metal versions of pretty much every character out there, and with Amy not actually having that many alternate versions, Metal Amy had to be here. And she's pretty awesome. Do you call it a she if it's a robot? I don't know. Anyway, Metal Amy was created, of course, by Eggman as part of his Metal series. Unfortunately for her/it, she/it was killed when she/it attacked New Robotropolis, but it was fun while it lasted. Number 1. Sonic for Hire Amy. This Amy has an appearance closer to CD Amy since they're all the pixelated versions of the characters, and she's pretty great. This Amy is somewhat more crude than other versions. How crude? Well, I'll make this as PG as possible. They were drunk, she shoved a bottle of beer into his butt, then the next morning she removed said beer from said butt and proceeded to drink the aforementioned beer. It's rectum fresh. Then she beats up a bunch of other characters to win Sonic's affection, then he leaves, then she gets the chair. Number 10. Sonic Man. Sonic Man appears in the 2006 Sonic the Hedgehog game, and he's, well, a man who dresses like Sonic. Well, he has big white gloves, a blue spiked helmet, and a Sonic t-shirt. As unconvincing as it may seem, he actually claims to be the real Sonic, believing Sonic himself to just be a fan dressed up. Luckily, you can crush him in a race and put him in his place, and then he'll ask to be your apprentice. But he can't. because he's weird. Number 9, Nikki. This one might be a bit of a cheat, but I think it counts, and you'll see why. Nikki is the main character in Shogakukan's Korokoro comic special stories. He seems like an unassuming geeky guy, but unbeknownst to him and everyone around him, he has one rather speedy alter ego. Yep, turns out he's Sonic. Even though in his normal form, Nikki is rather weak and cowardly, when he turns into Sonic, he becomes a butt-kicking superhero, and he's boss. Number 8, Sonic.exe. This is actually a version of Sonic that originated in a creepypasta story from 2011. It tells a story of a mysterious and evil Sonic game where the version of Sonic within was a murderous psychopath, chasing down his friends and eventually catching the player in the real world. There was even a game created by MY5T Crimson, or I assume Mist Crimson, based on the story. It's a pretty terrifying looking version with black eyes, red pupils, and blood dripping from the eyes, and the story itself is pretty creepy. Not as creepy as a Russian sleep experiment, but still creepy. Number 7, Sonicexe the Hedgehog. Sonicexe the Hedgehog is a protagonist of the YouTube series called, as you may have guessed, Sonicexe the Hedgehog. He fights to stop the evil Dr. Robotnik from turning his friends into robots. He looks pretty different and actually changes based on the animator, but he generally looks weird. But he's got some pretty wicked glutes. Number 6, Supersonic. Supersonic is a powered up version of Sonic appearing in Fleetway's Sonic the Comic. After being exposed to evil energy, whenever Sonic is under stress or exposed to chaos energy, this psychotic entity takes over, bringing a whole lot of power, but also a whole lot of anger. He's super aggressive, has a pretty nasty sense of humor, and isn't afraid to put innocents in danger. He's kind of like Sonic's Hulk transformation, and he's a pretty awesome version, but not as awesome as... Number 5, Supersonic. Wait, what? Yep, there's another one. But this one's quite different. This Supersonic is somewhat more clearly a takeoff on the Super Saiyan transformation from the Dragon Ball series, and it's pretty sick. Rather than being an unwanted evil transformation, this is a huge power-up for Sonic that he was able to use by harnessing the power of the 7 Chaos Emeralds. This is the version found in the Sonic games, and while I love me some Hulk Sonic, this version is just so sick. Plus I've seen it more, so I'm just partial to it. Sue me. Number 4, Sanic Hedgehog. Sanic is a meme version of Sonic that took the internet by storm in 2010 after YouTuber Onyx Hart made a video showing how to draw Sanic Hedgehog. To call his drawing mediocre would be incredibly kind. It was pretty crap. But it was just so terrible and hilarious that everyone started referencing it, making pictures, comics, and videos all with a stupid looking Sonic, often saying, "Gotta go fast." It's totally juvenile, but I laugh every single time. Number 3, Underground Sonic. This version of Sonic found in Sonic Underground is quite different from other versions in that he can frickin' shred on the guitar. And also, turn the guitar into a laser rifle to shred his enemies. He also has different companions working with his siblings Sonya and Manic rather than his normal freedom fighter pals. And when they aren't kicking bad guy butt, they're rocking our socks off in their underground band. Number 2, Bonic. Bonic is another popular fan-made character who I suppose might be breaking the rules of this list because he's absolutely not a version of Sonic, but rather an original character, at least according to him. Bonic is just so silly and amazing. Go ahead and watch some of the videos, they're great. Number 1, King Sonic. Okay, I know I said I'd be stepping away from Archie, but I didn't say there would be no Archie. King Sonic was the king of Mobius in a possible future. He was married to Queen Sally Acorn and had 2 kids named Sonya and Manic. Not to be mistaken with Sonya and Manic from Sonic Underground, because, well, Manic is spelled with a K in this one. Plus, they're royalty. King Sonic traveled back in time to seek help, but when he got back, King Shadow had taken his place. But Sonic went, "Ah, hell nah," and he and his friends kicked Shadow out of there. He's a pretty cool version of Sonic. He doesn't look super different, but the crown and the cape just make him look so much more regal, which makes sense, I guess.